At the end, I was asking about the movie, and I asked them about that one particular part where everybody's talking, and they all cried out Epstein Island. And I went, oh, okay. Now I understand what we're up against.
Wow.
Epstein Island isn't the only island out there.
Some secrets aren't meant to be heard, because once you hear them, you can never go back to who you were before. 4 years, one man has been screaming into a microphone that nobody wanted to hold. They called him crazy. They called him a conspiracy theorist. Late-night hosts laughed at him on national television, the same hosts who, looking back now, should have been taking notes instead of cracking jokes. His name is Jim Caviezel, and the film he made, Sound of Freedom, wasn't just a movie. It was a warning Hollywood tried to bury, a warning the media tried to discredit, a warning the very people who claimed to protect children worked overtime to silence. But Caviezel didn't shut up. He couldn't, because what he saw you can't unsee. And now, he's dropping a bombshell that nobody saw coming. Jim claims he personally begged Ellen DeGeneres, yes, that Ellen, to use her massive platform to help save the children trapped on Epstein Island. He says he reached out. He says he pleaded. He says he gave her a chance to do the right thing. She did nothing. And tonight, Caviezel is finally naming names. He's pulling back the curtain on the connections between Hollywood's untouchable elite and the island that was supposed to stay a secret forever. So buckle up, because in the next few minutes, we're going to unpack Jim Caviezel's warnings, his desperate plea to Ellen DeGeneres, and the one question that's been haunting all of this from the very beginning. Who else knew? And more importantly, who chose to stay silent?
The Ellen situation.
Yeah.
You know, people found out that Ellen was mean, and all these people came out and said, Ellen, actually. And everybody, whoa,
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And she lost everything. She fell apart, disappeared, because people found out that this character that she was portraying in a half an hour on a television show is not really who she was.
I brought this up a few years ago, and all of a sudden I was attacked by every media. Look it up. It's there.
Rewind a few years, and Jim Caviezel was living the dream. Top of the Hollywood food chain. Fame. Fortune. Red carpets. The kind of life most actors would sell their soul for. He had everything to lose, and absolutely nothing to gain by speaking out. He could have stayed quiet. He could have cashed the checks, smiled for the cameras, and disappeared into a mansion in the hills like everybody else. That's what they wanted him to do. But Jim did something Hollywood never forgives. He walked away. He made Sound of Freedom, a film based on the real-life story of Tim Ballard, a former government agent who literally risked his life to rescue children from trafficking networks across Latin America. This wasn't fiction pulled out of thin air. This was real. This was happening, and it still is. During filming in Colombia, Caviezel and his crew saw something that no human being should ever have to witness. Children being sold, in broad daylight, like cattle, like merchandise, like they meant nothing. Jim later said something that still gives people chills. What I filmed was fiction, but what I saw was real. He brought that film back to Hollywood thinking, naively, maybe, that the industry would stand behind a movie about saving children. He thought there'd be applause, awards, solidarity. Instead, he got blacklisted, erased, treated like a leper. And the question is why?
They're created out of fear, and with something like Sound of Freedom, it specifically is looking at QAnon concepts of these child rings that are run by the high-level elites.
For some reason, the entire media is smearing this movie as a dangerous conspiracy theory. The press is saying that the star, Jim Caviezel, is a QAnon guy. And Jim plays Tim Ballard, which is strange because just a few years ago, the same media was celebrating Tim Ballard's heroics. So why is the media warning people not to see a movie about child that's based on a true story?
Here's what most people don't know. Major studios, major networks, major streaming platforms, they were quietly pressured by powerful figures to boycott this film. Not just ignore it, boycott it. Stars were warned. Touch this movie, promote this movie, even tweet about this movie, and your career is finished. Think about that for a second. A film about rescuing children, and the most powerful people in entertainment were terrified of it.
I was not emotionally prepared for the new film, Sound of Freedom. You've heard it referred to as a right-wing film, as a Christian film, as a conspiracy movie, as a QAnon film. You know, they use all the buzzwords to make this film as radioactive as possible.
Sound of Freedom, it specifically is looking at QAnon concepts of these child rings that are run by the high-level elites. Now, it's not true.
The movie highlights the very real, not conspiracy theory of human. Need I remind you of another thing that was considered a conspiracy theory up until 5 seconds ago, which was the fact that a little guy named Jeffrey Epstein had a little island where the most powerful people, the tippity top of government officials, celebrity, Hollywood, would go?
So ask yourself the question that nobody in mainstream media will ask. Why would an entire industry work this hard to bury a film about saving kids? Why would billionaires, executives, and celebrities coordinate to silence a story that should have been celebrated? The answer started leaking out the moment the Epstein documents were unsealed. The public expected the usual suspects: politicians, hedge fund managers, maybe a creepy prince or two. What they got instead was a list that stretched across every corner of power you can imagine. People who attended his parties, people who flew on his private jet, the one they nicknamed the Lolita Express, people who actually visited his island. And buried in that list was one name that made everyone who had been following Jim Caviezel's story freeze in their tracks: Ellen DeGeneres. And her name didn't just show up once. It appeared again, and again, and again, not in casual mentions, but in contexts that made people stop scrolling and ask out loud, wait, what did she actually know? The files revealed her name in a 2014 email chain about meeting schedules. On the surface, nothing damning. But for the millions of people who had been listening to Caviezel for years, it was the missing puzzle piece. The connection nobody could explain away anymore. Jim says he reached out to her directly. He says he begged her to use her platform to speak up for the children trapped on that island. She never said a word. And here's where the story takes a turn so dark, most people don't want to follow it. Because there's another name woven into all of this. A name that connects Ellen to a tragedy that, to this day, has never been fully explained. August 2022. And Hetchy, a fiery car crash in Los Angeles. She drove her vehicle straight into a home, and the explosion that followed took her life. The official ruling? An accident. Case closed. But the internet never bought it. Because it had a history of trying to speak out about the dark side of Hollywood. And the timing was suspicious. Right as the Epstein revelations were building momentum, she's suddenly gone. There are unconfirmed reports, whispered, never proven, that and have been quietly working on a documentary exposing child trafficking networks. The rumored title, Children of the Machine. Whether it ever truly existed, the world may never know. But here's what we do know. And Hetchy spent years trying to process what she had witnessed during her relationship with Ellen. Things she said were too disturbing to speak aloud. Things that haunted her. And then, just like that, she was gone. Sources close to and anonymous, unverified, but persistent, have whispered for years that her death was no accident. That she knew too much. That she was silenced before she could finally talk. Is there proof? No. There may never be. But in a story this full of sealed documents, missing footage, and suddenly dead witnesses, and Hetchy's name lingers in the air like a question that nobody in power wants to answer. But here's the twist. Ellen wasn't the only one. Oprah Winfrey's name appeared in the Epstein files over 5 times. In sworn deposition transcripts, Oprah claimed she barely knew Epstein. But her connections to other extremely controversial figures have raised more than a few eyebrows. She was a vocal supporter, for years, of a man named John of God, a so-called Brazilian spiritual healer. Oprah praised him on her show, featured him to millions of viewers, vouched for his credibility. He was later convicted of horrific crimes and sentenced to nearly 400 years in prison.
This is an interview I wasn't sure would ever happen. One of the most famous spiritual healers in the world rarely talks to anyone on camera. John of God agreed to sit down with me under a mango tree on the grounds of the casa. A group of his patients gathered to watch. John of God speaks only Portuguese, so Heather Cumming helped translate.
Ready, guys? You describe yourself as a spiritual medium. What does that mean, a medium?
And then there's the school. In 2007, Oprah opened a multi-million-dollar academy for underprivileged girls in South Africa. It was supposed to be her legacy, her gift to the world. But almost immediately, a dormitory matron was accused of unspeakable things involving the students. Oprah handled it publicly, She testified before Congress, and then it all got very quiet, very quickly.
The trial of a former dormitory matron charged with 6 students at Oprah Winfrey School for Girls in South Africa is resuming. Prosecutors say former dorm matron Tina Virginia Makopo tried to kiss and fondle the girls. She's also accused of kicking and hitting some of them. Makopo pleaded innocent to 14 charges of indecent assault and criminal injury in South Africa. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, the ex-headmistress of the $40 million school is suing Winfrey for defamation. The suit claims someone would conclude from Winfrey's comments that the school employee knew of the alleged and was actively involved in covering it up.
I was, needless to say, devastated and really shaken to my core.
Winfrey said she was disappointed in the former headmistress. The TV talk show host also made comments about students who felt there was an atmosphere of repression at the school.
And Epstein isn't even the only connection. Oprah was photographed with Harvey Weinstein. Yes, that Harvey Weinstein for years. She attended his parties. She smiled for his cameras. She rubbed shoulders with him at every major event. And she never said a single word against him until the entire world had already turned on him. Jim Caviezel uses a very specific word to describe people like Oprah. He calls them gatekeepers, people who lend their fame, their credibility, their massive platforms to systems that quietly exploit the most vulnerable, whether they know it or not. Now, let's be clear. None of this is proof of any crime. Ellen hasn't been charged. Oprah hasn't been accused. They are, legally speaking, innocent. But the connections exist. The questions remain. And the deafening silence from the most powerful voices in media is starting to speak louder than any denial ever could. Which brings us to the man at the center of it all. Jeffrey Epstein. August 2019. Dead in federal custody. The official ruling, suicide. But for millions of people around the world, that word has never sat right. Because everything that night was just a little too convenient. The cameras, they malfunctioned. The guards, they fell asleep at the exact same moment. The investigation, rushed. The surveillance footage that should have shown the world exactly what happened, mysteriously unavailable. And with Epstein's death, the public lost the only thing that could have broken the entire system wide open, his testimony. Since then, documents have trickled out drop by drop. A few names here, a few redacted pages there. But the full truth, the complete picture of who knew, who flew, who visited, who participated, is still buried under mountains of legal protection and media silence. Every release is censored. Every file is incomplete. Every page has black bars covering the names that matter most. Meanwhile, the people in those files, they haven't disappeared. They're still here, still working, still smiling on red carpets, still accepting awards, still being celebrated. The machinery of protection, the money, the lawyers, the media allies, the PR teams, keeps them untouchable while the public waits for an accountability that never, ever comes. Jim Caviezel has been screaming about this for years. And he doesn't just see a scandal. He sees a system, a network so deeply woven into the fabric of power that exposing it feels almost impossible. He's been blacklisted, mocked, dismissed, laughed off stages. But he keeps talking, because he believes something is coming. A reckoning, a moment when the walls finally fall. And behind every name, behind every redacted document, behind every sealed file, there's a truth that most people are too comfortable to face. Over 300,000 children under the age of 18 have gone missing in the United States alone. That's not a number on a page. That's an entire stadium packed with kids. Vanished. Approximately 85,000 children who crossed the southern border have disappeared without a trace. No paperwork, no follow-up, no answers. Just gone, swallowed by a system that was supposed to protect them. And yet, despite the threats, despite the consequences, despite watching people like Enhechi meet mysterious ends, whistleblowers keep coming forward. They speak knowing what it might cost them. They speak because staying silent is no longer an option. Enhechi is gone. Epstein is gone. And with him, the full extent of what he knew died too. Conveniently, completely, permanently. The secrecy continues. The protection of the elite continues. The system that allowed Epstein to operate freely for decades is still running exactly the way it was designed to run. But the children are still waiting. The survivors are still speaking. And the truth is still clawing its way to the surface. Jim Caviezel says a reckoning is coming. He says there will be a moment, an event, when the walls finally come crashing down and the truth can no longer be contained. He points to whistleblowers preparing to speak, to sealed documents about to be released, to something shifting beneath the surface that most people can't feel yet. So is he right? Or is this just another story destined to be buried? Another list of names that'll stay redacted forever? Another empty promise that justice is right around the corner? The island is still there. The files are still sealed. The powerful are still protected. But the questions aren't going anywhere. So drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Was Jim Caviezel right all along? Did Ellen know more than she ever let on? And how many more names are still hidden in those sealed files? Hit that like button if this opened your eyes. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because trust me, this story is far from over. Till next time,